All right, let's get right into it. Today's explainer is all about a seriously fascinating methodology for getting students to read deep. And I mean really deep. We're talking about Socratic paired texts. If you're looking to move past those basic surface-level reading assignments and get students actually using complex inferential skills, you are in exactly the right place.
Our source material hits us right out of the gate with this awesome metaphor. It calls inferential reading the deep end of the reading pool. It's all about reading between the lines, interpreting things, and actually seeing the big picture. And you know, the text points out that this is arguably the most complex skill we can teach, yet it's totally neglected in schools today. So how do we fix that? How do we get our students swimming in the deep end?
Well, here is our roadmap. We're going to quickly hit on the assessment frenzy, entering the deep end, the Socratic procedure, some dialectic duos, a brief look at copyright law, and finally, the ultimate goal.
Starting off with what the source calls the modern assessment frenzy.
To really get why the Socratic method is such a game changer, we have to look at the problem it's trying to solve. The source takes a pretty cynical, eye-opening look at current educational policy. It literally defines assessment as a method for demonstrating the success of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The argument here is that the whole standardized testing craze actually favors wealthy families, the ones who can afford the test prep, while just masking deeper social inequalities. It's basically saying high-stakes tests measure privilege way better than they measure actual learning.
And it doesn't stop there. The text has a similarly sharp take on the modern curriculum, calling it an arbitrary selection of subjects imposed to serve a utopian neoliberal society. The author argues, and we're just reporting their stance here, that things like arts, drama, and deep conversational skills are intentionally pushed to the side, preparing graduates for what they call low-wage drudgery. Pretty heavy stuff, right?
Okay, moving on to entering the deep end, or the idea that it takes two to tango.
If that's the bleak reality of modern education, according to our source, what's the way out? Well, for a long time, the holy grail in classrooms was just compare and contrast, but the text argues that's barely scratching the surface. The real goal we should be shooting for is dialectical reasoning. We don't want kids just making lists of how two texts are alike or different. We want them uncovering hidden assumptions, spotting author bias, evaluating completely opposing truths, and then building a brand new synthesis. It's all about tension.
So let's look at the actual Socratic Seminar procedure.
You can't just drop two massive texts on a student's desk and say, all right, be brilliant. The source lays out a really structured 9-step framework. First, you select texts that are genuinely fascinating or even controversial. Then, you group students into teams of 2 to 4, but step 3 is where the magic really starts. As they read the first text, they annotate and text code. They literally write an N for new info and a Q for unknown info. It's a super tactile, hands-on way to get them monitoring their own understanding before anyone even speaks.
Then we move into the middle phase. After coding, students huddle up and synthesize their ideas locally in their small groups. Next, the teacher steps in for a quick whole-class micro-lecture. But get this, the teacher isn't just lecturing, they're firing off Socratic questions to activate background knowledge and clear up misconceptions. After that, students go right back to their groups and map out their updated understanding on a big piece of butcher paper. They are basically watching their own brains grow in real time.
To bring it all home, the teacher introduces the second text, the tango partner, if you will. The students run through that exact same reading, coding, and synthesis loop again, but this time they're actively hunting for clues and connections back to the first text. This whole 9-step dance builds up to a final debrief, where the teacher hits them with the really big questions. What generalizations can we make? What are the shared themes? What new truth emerges when we smash these two texts together?
Which brings us to Section 4, Dynamic Dialectic Duos.
This is where it gets really fun. The actual case studies curated to spark debate. Take this pairing. We've got Martin Luther King Jr.'s Letter from Birmingham Jail matched up against Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. The source highlights how perfect this match is because King actually built his arguments directly on Thoreau's philosophical foundation. You get King's real-world moral resistance in the civil rights era clashing and blending with Thoreau's 19th century ideas on individual conscience.
And to guide that discussion, you throw a massive Socratic question out there, like, when is it morally acceptable to break the law? Just imagine the conversations that sparks. Students aren't just memorizing historical dates, they're wrestling with massive ethical truths about government failure, citizenship, and morality.
Here is another brilliant combo from the text, mixing ancient philosophy with modern pop culture. We pair Plato's Allegory of the Cave,
from way back around 375 BCE with Morpheus's famous red pill speech from the movie The Matrix. The overlap is absolutely wild. Both tackle reality versus illusion, the comfort of ignorance, and how painful it can be to finally see the truth.
The killer question for this duo: why do humans resist truth? Like, is ignorance actually preferable sometimes? Does knowing the truth isolate you from everyone else? By using a modern sci-fi lens to decode a dense ancient text, you're fast-tracking students right into the deep end of the reading pool.
Okay, let's briefly touch on navigating copyright law.
Because, hey, brilliant ideas are great, but we gotta source our materials legally. The text divides things cleanly into two buckets. First, you've got the public domain. This is the stuff you can copy and share all day long: Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Sojourner Truth, Pericles. Then you've got works that are not yet public domain. Think Dr. Seuss's The Lorax, a Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie TED Talk, or Shirley Jackson. For these, you're going to need database access, or you have to be super careful about educational fair use. The guide breaks down a few quirky rules too. Generally, pre-1928 works are public domain, and U.S. government docs are never copyrighted. But here's a truly wild detail from the text. MLK's I Have a Dream speech is public domain because he delivered it live to a massive public audience. But his letter from Birmingham jail? That's a written document, so it's still copyrighted by his estate and requires proper licensed database access. Crazy, right?
Finally, Section 6, the ultimate educational goal.
So why go through all this trouble? The text argues it's all about the hidden curriculum. We aren't doing this just to bump up test scores. The real endgame is teaching kids how to think, how to infer, and how to synthesize opposing views. We want them challenging their own assumptions and honestly spotting manipulation and propaganda in the real world. The ultimate goal is churning out active, democratic citizens who know how to hold a civilized dialogue. And that brings us to a quote from the source that just perfectly nails the stakes of this explainer. This is the deep end of the reading pool. Not recall, not worksheets, but interpretive intelligence. That right there, interpretive intelligence, is the absolute antidote to that cynical assessment frenzy we talked about earlier. It's about building thinkers, not just test takers. We've covered the theory, the procedure, and the sheer power of pairing texts this way. It's an incredible tool for moving beyond surface-level learning. So I'll leave you with this one provocative question to chew on. Knowing the power of dialectical reasoning, how will you guide your students into the deep end of democratic dialogue?